Police now say the man shot and killed over the weekend in Rockford was a Jehovah's Witness, and a 15-year-old is charged with his murder. Police were called out to 7th Avenue near 9th Street Saturday around 11:30 in the morning. That's where they found 54-year-old Miguel Perez shot in his car. Our Jess Lipson talked to a neighbor about what happened.
Today, we are talking about the dangers that are inherent to being one of Jehovah's Witnesses, the specific dangers that the governing body doesn't warn people about. And they act like they do. And in a very insidious way, they act like they do. We're talking about the dangers that Jehovah's Witnesses encounter going door to door.
Yeah, real, physical, life-threatening danger.
We're talking about it because there is a specific gap in the organization's transparency. They have these kind of stories that you'll read, and I don't know if you're familiar with the. I know you are, Falon, but if you're familiar with the yearbooks that I think they used to do them more, but I don't even know if they do them now. But every year you get a yearbook of Jehovah's Witnesses, tell you all the stats of Jehovah's Witnesses, how many Bible studies were started, how many, all these other things about the preaching work, and then it would go on to, and for some reason I never figured out, talk about stories that happened 40 or 50 years prior to the yearbook year. It'd be like the 1998 yearbook, and then it would be talking about just post World War II. Yeah, I have no idea why that was, but it they'd have a couple different kinds of stories that they'd share. There's the story where there's some small family trying to get somewhere in Nazi Germany. And right around their corner, there's some Nazis, and they pray, and the Nazis are thinking about killing them, and then they pray a whole bunch, and then miraculously the Nazis go, you remind me of my mother, and they send them on their way, and everybody's happy, and it's fine, and God protected them. And then they have the other group that is so far removed from our daily life as when we were Jehovah's Witnesses that you kind of just dismiss it. And the other group is the groups like the Cusero family. And if you don't know, there was a video called Purple Triangles in the 90s. Maybe late 90s, early 2000s, maybe it was 90s. And there was this family called the Cruceros, and they were Jehovah's Witnesses in Nazi Germany. I think pretty much every one of them got wiped out in World War II. Most of them in concentration camps. It was horrible. It was awful, but they got wiped out. And so they share those stories. So be strong is what the message from the governing body is. But those things can happen. But they're so far removed from our daily life that they never really say, hey, be careful. Going door to door can be dangerous.
Yeah, I think sharing the stories from decades and decades and decades ago gives the reader or the current member like a sense of security. Like, well, that's a long time ago, and we've evolved as a society since then. And, I'm not in that kind of danger, going door to door. In the ministry work or things like that, which is false. That's just an illusion. But yeah, the yearbook definitely gives you sort of like a whitewashed, like a highlight reel of the risks that are associated with being a Jehovah's Witness or engaging in the ministry.
Right. And for some reason, they share those stories where supposedly Jehovah miraculously saves some Jehovah's Witnesses, but he doesn't save others. So there's no guarantee, but somehow there's an implication that you are safer being one of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Sure.
And there's just so much risk going door to door. You're knocking on the door. You don't know. You can have somebody with in very intense emotional, mental health problems, who has just, raided their uncle's gun cabinet. You have no idea who it is that you're dealing with. When you knock on that door, I've had rifles pointed at me, and that's not an uncommon story. I saw comments on our YouTube community post where someone said same thing happened to them and that they were assaulted. It happens, and they're not being transparent about it. And so we thought this week we could share some stories, both ones that we've verified, true stories. You don't want this to turn into but true stories of things that happened to Jehovah's Witnesses when they're out preaching, and how the organization doesn't protect them and doesn't warn them and make it clear that what the risk is that they're taking.
Yeah, I, of course, have had, experiences from my time as a full-time minister or a pioneer within the organization. And I guess part of me just thought that was a more a more unique experience. But then when I started kind of, deep diving online in preparation for this episode, I mean, some of the things I read from, verified news sources were just blowing my mind. So it's just so much more widespread than even what I realized.
Right. And we thought we'd start with maybe some stories that we knew from mine is not firsthand. My aunt told me something that happened, and it was verifiable. And you had something that your dad had shared with you. What was that?
Yeah. So a friend of our family who I've known since childhood, his parents, and they were older. I mean, they weren't, even middle age. They were, up in years a little bit. They were
Right.
in the ministry, door to door, a married couple walking down the sidewalk, and just out of the blue, they were approached by a stranger. He had a weapon. I don't remember what they said it was, an implement. It wasn't a gun. And he attacked them both and severely injured the wife. The husband tried to protect her, but he received several blunt force blows and died as a result.
Oh, jeez.
And of course, it was devastating to everyone that knew them. They're really, really kind-hearted family, and of course, there are people that could say, well, you could have encountered that person anywhere. They could have approached you at a gas station or in a public park. That's true.
Sure.
However, you're two susceptible older people alone in a neighborhood you're not familiar with. So already, you're just in a potentially dangerous situation when you don't need to be.
Right.
Your sole purpose in being in that place at that time is connected to promoting the organization.
Right. You wouldn't have been there. They would have been at home having tea or doing gardening or
Right.
something, doing the retired life.
Yeah.
A similar situation with what I had heard about, and this was from, just so you know that it was verifiable. This is from Laverne, Minnesota. I was born there. This is if you're wondering what Laverne, Minnesota looks like, it's about 5 to 8,000, maybe 10,000 people in the southwest corner of Minnesota. It looks exactly what you think it looks like. And it's just this small town, flat, fields around it. And in fact, if you look at I think it's season 2 of the TV show Fargo, is supposedly based in Minnesota, and they rebuild the mountain. It just looks like that.
Yeah.
And season 2, I think, is based around the year I'm born, which is when this actually happened, and of that show Fargo. But it shows you aesthetically what it looked like then, and then. If you add a Kingdom Hall, you can picture the whole thing together. There was a young sister, and the reason I know this, by the way, is that my aunt, she was married to my dad's brother. She's passed away since, but her and I were super close in my teen years and into my 20s. We worked together for a lot of time in my 20s, and we were we're very close friends. And we would be doing these long drives from Laverne, Minnesota, down to different towns like Lamar's and Sioux City and Sioux Falls, and we would do sales together. And I still work in credit card terminals and point of sale systems. We were doing that together back then, and we'd have these conversations on the way back and forth. And she told me, and she had lived in Laverne most of her adult life. She's born there. She only moved away for I think 5 or 6 years to Virginia and then moved back. And she was telling me about an experience that happened in Laverne. And what happened is that this young pioneer sister, her last name was, she was out, doing the pioneering, knocking door to door with her pioneer partner, and she ran into a man who wanted a Bible study. So she started a Bible study with him. And then she turned him over. And what you're supposed to do is if you're a woman in the Jehovah's Witness organization, supposedly for their safety, you're supposed to turn the Bible study over. If it's of the opposite sex, so that a woman's not going to a man's house and sitting quietly alone with him and studying the Bible, you bring in a Jehovah's Witness male. So they call him a brother. They go, okay, you study with him. Well, when this happened, the man that she had started the study with felt very scorned.
Betrayed.
And he didn't like that. And he started stalking her. And he went to all over the place following her, and he went to the Kingdom Hall. And this again is, I believe, either early 80s or very late 70s. And he went to the Kingdom Hall, and he saw her in the Kingdom Hall parking lot. She knew she's always there. She's there so many times for field service arrangements, for the meetings. And he found a moment when she was alone and went up and stabbed her and murdered her. And it was something that was covered by local papers. The Rock County Herald covered it. It's just such a shame that had to happen. And she was very young. She'd still be alive today, very likely. So she missed out on most of her life because she really wasn't aware of the danger of going door to door, and that the organization, and that even though they had their feeble little thing, once you meet somebody, you just don't know whose door you're walking up to and knocking on. There's so much risk. It was such a tragedy. And in fact, my parents, and in fact, your parents were friends with her siblings.
Yes.
And my parents still are. They're very close with them. And so they lost out on their younger sister for all those decades because no one was being clear about the risk. And there's just so many times that they send out 2 women to a door, Jehovah's Witnesses, or they send out even young. They don't do this so much anymore, but back when we were kids, many times we got sent to the door, just kids, right?
All the time.
Remember that kid Seth in our congregation? He was really smart and very precocious. I ended up at the door with him once, and he was just like, and the guy's like, "You don't believe in the gospel?" I'm like, "What the hell is the gospel?" And he's like, "Well, the gospel is this." And I'm remembering this. I'm thinking, we were both 9 at a door with our parents about probably 30, 40 yards away down at the street. Just why? I mean, yeah, they were kind of looking out for us, but that's nuts. That could have been any crazy person.
Yeah, I remember like you and me getting dropped off at one end of the block, and then like our moms would start on the opposite end of the block, and we would, just meet in the middle. And that was just totally normal. I mean, we didn't think anything about it. Nobody did.
That's nuts. Yeah.
But also, I think
you have a much better memory than me, but that is familiar to me.
Also, I think the idea that the organization acts as if just because a brother, just because that study was turned over to a brother, that there was no danger. Oh, well,
right.
It's a man and it's a brother, and so everything will be fine. Crazy people are still crazy people. And crazy recognizes no gender. So yeah, it's just dangerous in general.
Yeah, absolutely. We also ran into quite a few news articles here, and they're from around the world, places in the U.S. as well as around the world. And we're just going to share a couple of them. We're not, trying to start a murder podcast here. We're just sharing what the real risks are. And one of them we both ran into in Rockford, Illinois. And this isn't because there was no shortage of stories, but we both found this one pretty interesting. This is Miguel Perez. What happened to him is that it was a drive-by shooting that was targeted at the house, it turned out. So he was at the front door. A rival gang goes by and shoots the front of the house and shoots him down. And he goes back to his car, collapses in his seat, and dies in his seat. And the point is that Miguel Perez was out there trying to spread his so-called good news, and he thought that he'd be okay, but he is going through a neighborhood that later on witnesses talk about where they hear gunshot all the time. So he was sent out into a dangerous neighborhood specifically to recruit more Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right. Yeah, and when you are attending meetings and you're participating in what was called the Theocratic Ministry School, which was like a weekly program to prepare you to participate in the ministry, you would hear things like, if you encounter a no trespassing sign, well, that doesn't apply to you for this, and this reason. And then at the end, they would say, of course, use your own judgment. So the witness world has so many unspoken rules or unspoken expectations So they might say, well, use your own judgment, but also it's clear that the expectation for you is to proceed onto that property and knock at the door. And they would say things like, oh, that's usually just, to keep hunters off their land or to keep solicitors away, but we're not soliciting because we're not selling anything. So that doesn't really apply. Those are just common things that I heard. So
Right.
the little amount of warning that the homeowner was giving you that you're not welcome here was just disregarded most of the time.
Right. And I even remember when I think I want to say 98, the Kingdom Ministry was a monthly little bulletin Jehovah's Witness active, preachers got. And it changed the rule on that a little bit where it said, oh yeah, okay, if it says no trespassing, maybe don't trespass. But if you do, the organization won't legally back you up.
Right. You're on your own.
So it's still a suggestion that you should probably go try to save them.
Right.
Even though we won't help you. And while we're on the subject, I don't remember any cases of the organization helping anybody with anything legally in that situation, but they're not spending money on that. But I remember that that implication. It's your judgment if you want to go on the property,
Right.
but we won't back you up. So it was just more of a cover on asses, but you do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
Oof.
I read one, this is actually from the BBC Online, and this poor couple, my gosh, it was an elderly couple and their son.
Where was it?
Go ahead. What's that?
Oh, sorry. I was just asking, where was it?
Okay. So this is an elderly couple and their son. They were an Italian family, but they were in Mali, Mali, Mali. And it said that the reason that they were there was to help establish a church or to help launch a congregation there. And all three of them were kidnapped from their home by a group of religious extremists. And they were held for 2 years. They were taken in May of 2022, and they were just released in February of this year. So yeah, again, Italian family in this strange place specifically to establish a congregation or to grow the organization in that location where they were not welcome.
I see it's a country. I had to Google it. It's a country in West Africa then, huh?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah, all three of them.
Yikes. Well, our next one is it's two Jehovah's Witnesses. They were kidnapped by a religious extremist group in the Philippines. It was in the southern Philippines, and this is a while ago. So this is August 22nd, 2002 is when the news report says. And the military and local police blamed Al-Qaeda, this group of extremists, and they kidnapped these two individuals, these two Jehovah's Witnesses, because they did not like them preaching in their area, in their turf, their area. So they were considered infidels. And after a brief stay with them, the two male hostages were found in bags with notes denouncing them as infidels, and they were decapitated. So they got beheaded because they were sent out into an area and said, preach the good news. And they did it with this optimism.
Right.
I mean, whereas the one in Rockford a couple ago, I mean, that was literally, and you can maybe go, okay, well, it's other countries. It's not happening here. It is happening here, but it also is happening elsewhere. It's happening in West Africa. It's happening in the Philippines. It's happening in the United States.
And the idea that when you think of a missionary, you think of someone who, volunteers for service. And even though technically, yes, witness missionaries, they sign up for that program, they volunteer. Right. But again, if your critical thinking is not intact, if your mind is not truly your own, you're not fully volunteering because you don't have an accurate understanding or you're not having information shared with you to give you an accurate understanding of what it is you might be running into out in the field.
Right. Right. And that's the main problem we have with this is that the governing body is not being transparent about the dangers
Yeah.
that can happen here. Let's see here. We have another one here. Yes, this is from 2024. Okay, this is from February. It is kidnappers abduct 9 Jehovah's Witnesses in Kogi and demand, I don't know, it says N 30 million ransom. I don't know what N is. It was just a group of Jehovah's Witnesses who were traveling to the convention, and they had this vehicle that they were traveling. It was a little bus, and then another vehicle pulled up alongside them and kidnapped everyone and was expecting a ransom. They were warned not to involve the police. It does look like they were. Oh, I apologize. It does look like they were later released, but they were sent to travel to a convention, and there was no arrangement in place. Now, this was not the preaching work specifically, but there was no arrangement in place from the local brothers to say, don't travel through this area. Now, there's obviously risks anywhere,
Sure.
but there are certainly areas where you don't want to travel by, for example, a cartel in certain countries. You don't want to travel by where they're searching for funds for, if you're dealing with Somalia, the piracy there is a real thing. There's certain areas you do not want to travel. And in this case, they were held for ransom. And it's just no one seems to be handling the security of the so-called brothers and sisters. No one is in charge of, okay, don't go here, do go here. And just like the first, I'm sorry, I'm bouncing around a little bit. Like the first story I was talking about in my hometown, they're less concerned with the loss of a single pioneer sister, as they call them. They're more concerned with the bad optics of many people not going out and preaching because they know about that story.
Right.
The organization just doesn't have any protections in place for people doing this, and this is a basically dangerous thing that they're doing. I know I'm probably beating this into the ground, but it's nuts.
Well, even as long as we've been out, we still learn things that we didn't know. And this, I mean, I knew that it was dangerous, but even still, like we said, we're still learning just experiences. The story that you just shared, I did read one account of that, and they said one of the women on the bus was a pregnant lady who was really close to delivering. And I just thought, even though she was released, thank goodness, what a traumatizing experience.
Yeah.
You're
Absolutely.
scared for your life, you're scared for your spouse, and now your unborn child. I mean, just, those are mental scars you're going to carry.
It also strikes me that if something like this traumatic happens to one of Jehovah's Witnesses and they survive it, they have trauma. It's an awful experience. Obviously, the organization really isn't huge on it and encouraging people to go get therapy. But that trauma reinforces an us versus them mentality. And if you have a Jehovah's Witness that survives a traumatic event, particularly if they were doing something spiritual at the time, you've got one for life.
Oh, yeah.
They're not going anywhere. Now it is Satan's system, and we have to put extra resistance, even though it didn't necessarily have anything to do with the fact that they were Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah.
In fact, most of these cases, it wasn't about whether they're Jehovah. I don't think there's one single one that it made any difference that they were one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, no, that's it. I mean, there was even the one where the local extremist religion didn't want them proselytizing. They could have just as easily been Mormons or Catholics. It didn't make any difference. So Jehovah's Witnesses, the organization and the leadership, really, it's a huge win when somebody is almost killed, because those are lifers, and those are people that are, if they're having families, are going to make lifers of their children.
Oh yeah, everybody's locked in. Your whole bloodline is locked in for sure. Those are the generational stories that we hear. Thankfully, nothing that violent ever happened to me. I do think back to my pioneer days, and I remember so many times me and all my little little girlfriends, high school age, 17, 18, 19,
Mm-hmm.
4 of us loading in a car and driving way out, 40, 45 minutes, close to an hour from where we lived. We're in the middle of nowhere. And we're just the 4 of us,
Right.
just knocking on doors, earning those hours. Everybody's worried about making their time or, meeting their goals. The fact that none of us were ever seriously harmed blows my mind. It's astounding to me. I also had someone answer the door, gun in hand. It was a really dilapidated looking mobile home. And I assumed that nobody even lived there, period. But the sister that was driving our car group, she said, well, just in case, like go knock on the door and just leave a magazine.
A little bing bong. Yeah.
So when we got a little closer, we could hear like either a television or a radio coming from inside. And I thought, oh, wow, somebody does live here. Knocked on the door, no answer. Knocked one more time. They always say, the second time, like knock with a little authority, And
It's just really piss them off.
Yeah, like knocked a little louder the second time. Door swung open. Man with a gun demanded to know who we were, and of course we're frozen, and we just said, we're Jehovah's Witnesses. We're just here to talk about the Bible. And he totally relaxed. He said, oh, I'm sorry. He said, I didn't mean to scare you. He said, I make moonshine in this trailer. He said, and I was afraid you were like with the ATF. Like, no, well, I'm not.
I like that one. That's a good story. Did he give you samples?
If only. No.
Yeah.
But I did take a magazine, which I got to count. Did count towards my quota. So it was a win in the end.
I'll be back give you more magazines and with a jug.
With an empty mason jar, I'll be here. Another.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say that was probably the scariest human to human interaction that I had. But multiple times we would have people that would turn their dogs loose on purpose. And a lot of times the dog was just going to bark and, scare you away. But we did have a woman, she came to the door, was not polite at all, kind of nasty. And so of course we're like, okay, like we're sorry to have bothered you. And I'm young, I'm maybe 18. And I was with a sister quite a bit older than me. And she walked back in the house, and just through the window, I saw her walk to the side door of the house and open it, and her Rottweiler came right for us. And we didn't even have time to get off the porch. So me and this sister, our backs are up against the woman's front door, and she's sort of behind me, and all that's between us and this very upset dog is our like book bags, and it's like snapping at us, and there was nowhere to go. I'm yelling at the dog, nothing's happening. Finally, I reached behind me and grabbed the doorknob and opened it, and we stepped into the woman's house. And of course she was like really upset. What are you doing? And I said, I'm so sorry, but like your dog's about to, chew my face off. And she acted as if it was totally a coincidence that the dog had gotten loose, even though we just saw her release it. So she called the dog off and put him in another room. And then she was a little nicer. She apologized. She's like, oh, sorry about that. And, sent us on our way. But in my research for this episode, dogs don't like Jehovah's Witnesses, period. I feel like JWs are the new mailman, because there are so many, dozens of stories of dogs biting, mauling JWs, and all kinds of dogs. I've read multiple pit bull stories, German Shepherd, Labrador Retriever. So they're just not welcome. They're just not welcome in general. And one story that I read, the sister who was attacked later sued the homeowner, and her case went all the way to the Supreme Court before it was denied. So we've said before, like, witnesses don't sue each other because they feel like it'll bring shame on God's name, but they're happy to sue you. So
the householder, the homeowner.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just a lot of little backwoods corners of the world that you can get sent. Here, I live in Oregon, and it was within 30 miles of a big city, and I remember walking back, driving back to this property, and I mean, I it was just deep in the woods, dank little trailers all over the place on the property.
Yeah.
I don't know what they were doing, but a woman answered a door in one of those house dresses. You know, it looks like the mother from Berenstain Bears. You know,
Yeah.
and she pulled out a big rifle, and it doesn't matter if it's a rifle's a rifle. Actually, it's a shotgun, is what it was. And she pointed at me and said, "You know, you're on my property, so I can do what I want." And I had to back away. I mean,
Wow.
I don't. I mean, she could have given me a warning, like maybe play Deliverance music on the speakers outside before I got to that place. But she was serious, and it's yes, that was an insane response. But Jehovah's Witnesses are going out and violating people's privacy and showing up on their property and bothering them. It even though I'm of not none of that mindset. If somebody rings my bell, it's not the Amazon guy. I'm like, oh, what is it? I'm immediately annoyed.
Yeah.
It's just putting Jehovah's Witnesses in this dangerous position all the time. And it's not the 70s or 80s anymore. They're not getting Jehovah's new JWs from doing this.
Right.
They're just going out and risking their life. And all the new Jehovah's Witnesses, the vast majority are Jehovah's Witnesses are coming are just born in.
Yeah.
They're baptized kids.
That was something that was just recently discussed. Shaka on the Anthony Morris Returns channel laid out like a list of things that he could, envision being discontinued, policies and practices that he thought maybe could kind of go by the wayside in the near future. And one of them specifically was the door-to-door work, because people don't interact like they used to. It's not effective in the way that it used to be. It's not keeping the numbers up.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just a risk. So I cannot recommend it enough. Not going out in service. You just Saturday mornings, they're gorgeous now. Just gorgeous.
It's meant for coffee and cartoons.